Dr. Donna Hicks is an associate at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. Dr. Hicks facilitated dialogues in numerous unofficial diplomatic efforts in the Middle East, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Colombia, Cuba, Libya, and Syria. She was a consultant to the BBC in Northern Ireland, where she co-facilitated a television series, Facing the Truth, with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. She consults the governments, corporations, schools, churches, and non-governmental organizations. Her book, Dignity: Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict, was published by Yale University Press in 2011. Her second book, Leading with Dignity: How to Create a Culture That Brings Out the Best in People, was published by Yale University Press in August 2018. I recommend both of those books to you. And Donna, so I'm going to hand over to you now for your address to us.
Yeah, thank you so much, both Michael and David. I'm thrilled to be here with this incredible organization, the Humanistic Leadership Academy. It's been doing such wonderful work, and I'm pleased and honored to be a part of it. So thank you, both Michael and David, for including me in this. And yes, you know, I've done a lot of work around dignity and the role it plays in our lives, in our relationships, in ourselves, the inner world that we inhabit, and how dignity affects that. But let me just start by saying, for those of you who don't know, as David pointed out, I've been, convening dialogues all over the world for the last couple of decades. And at some point, I realized that there was more going on at the table than just talking about the political issues that divided people. And there would be moments of real frustration and anger and resentment. And I thought, whoa, wait a minute, what's underneath all of that? And so, to make a very long story short, I'm just going to say that what I realized was that no matter where I was in the world, no matter where I was, there was this deep underlying human element that was keeping these conflicts alive. Because even times when, the interest of both parties was recognized, they still couldn't sign on to this agreement. And I figured there's something deeper going on. And because I'm a psychologist, I like to go deep. And what I ultimately discovered was the human dimension was related, profoundly related to the way they were being treated by the other side, that they weren't even being treated like human beings. And so I used the word dignity with them to describe the assaults that they felt as a human being, personal assaults to their dignity. And that word just resonated so deeply with all of the people with whom I was working. And so from that moment on, this was many years ago, maybe, over 15 years ago, I introduced this concept in international conflict resolution and wrote that book that David was talking about, Dignity: Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict. Then I was invited to go in all kinds of different areas like the corporate world, healthcare, education, because when that book came out, it seemed to address something profound within their organizations. And there was something about the word that people thought, yes, this is what's going on in my company. People are not feeling like they're being treated with dignity, and therefore we've got a toxic work culture. So what are we going to do? And this happened every time I went into the corporate world to help resolve some of their conflicts, because that's what happened after that first book came out. Everybody said, yeah, this you've nailed what our problem is internally. We've got to figure out how to lead with dignity. What do we do to lead with dignity? And so I made that really explicit and decided time to write the second book, Leading with Dignity. And that's why I'm here today. I want to share with you some of the deep insights about the human experience that are in that book. And they're not just my insights. I'm going to share my screen now so you can see my PowerPoint. They're not just my insights, but I learned from people all over the world about what was going on for them. Let me just see here. I'm trying to advance this slide. Oh no, wait, don't look at that. Hold on, I went way too far. Yes, here's where I want to be. So what happened in my exploration of dignity leadership. What happened was, I feel like this quote by John Nesbitt sums it up so beautifully. He says, the most important breakthroughs of the 21st century will not occur because of technology, but because of an expanding concept of what it means to be human. And what it means to be human, in my view, after all of these years of struggling with human beings who were tearing each other apart, what I realized was that we human beings, if you go to that unit of analysis, not of Americans or Europeans or, North Americans, South Americans, if you try to think about what does it mean to be a member of the human species, I can tell you three basic truths. The first one is we all yearn to be treated with dignity. I have yet to meet a human being who doesn't care about how people are treating them. So number one, we all yearn to be treated with dignity. Number two, when we're not treated with dignity, as if we matter, as if we're worthy, if we're not treated that way, then we suffer. And thirdly, and most importantly for this webinar, if we are treated with dignity, we flourish as human beings. And those three things really sums up the role dignity plays in understanding what it means to be human. So I'm going to take you through, my gosh, it was a circuitous route trying to figure out how to make this concept of dignity practical. How can we use it both in international conflicts, but then I came to realize we needed to use it in the corporate world, in education, in healthcare, in all these different organizations. How can we make it so real for people so that they understand it deeply? Because one of the major problems is when I went into any of these other arenas besides international conflict dialogues, like in the corporate world and all these other places, is that the ignorance surrounding dignity was enormous. People really hadn't paid much attention, and education especially. Now thanks to Michael, we are getting to that point, but when I first started, there wasn't dignity in any course in high school, and forget about grammar school, but high school or the university. And something so fundamental to the human experience, that we all want to be treated this way. We all yearn to, we have this higher aspiration to want to, it's like Michael always loves quoting me with this one. It's our highest common denominator. We want to be treated as if we matter. And yet nowhere was it in our educational system. So I had to figure it all out by myself. And it took me a good 7 or 8 years to be able to come up with these practical ways of thinking about what dignity is and how it relates to our lives and how it relates to our relationships, and fundamentally here for this webinar, how it relates to good leadership. So what is it? What is dignity? I'm assuming I don't want to assume, let's put it that way, that we all understand what it is. So part of my problem was trying to come up with a definition of dignity that, because if this is a universal human value and desire, then we have to all be on the same page with this. So after going through all of the literature in philosophy and in theology, I finally realized, look, this is such a volatile issue. This is such an emotional issue that I have to make the language simple. Because when we're all charged up from having our dignity assaulted, we're not going to get into our analytical brains. We need immediate understanding about what's going on. So my very simple definition of what dignity is that it's our inherent value and worth, and at the same time, our inherent vulnerability. And what do I mean by that? Well, yes, we are all born, this is my take on this, we're all born with dignity. We come into the world with dignity, and we come into the world vulnerable to having that dignity assaulted or injured or violated. So just having that awareness that sometimes we're like bulls in a china shop where we're just blasting through our relationships or treating people with, in very mean and hurtful ways. Our dignity hurts just like anything else, any other injury. And I'm going to say more about that, like any other physical injury. So inherent value and vulnerability. And usually if I'm in person, I always ask people what they think the word means. And inevitably, people say it's respect. But I think it's different from respect because, in my view, respect has to be earned, where dignity, being treated with dignity, should be an absolutely fundamental human value and human right. So, because, I was working on these conflicts, people would pound their fist on this table and say to me, "We demand respect." I keep pounding, "We demand respect." And I would say, wait a minute, that's a bridge too far. What you can demand is to be treated with dignity, as if you're a human being. And we can do something about that, but we cannot demand respect. That you have to earn. So that was my take on this. And whoops, where am I? Okay, so here it is, different from respect. And if you have any trouble imagining that we come into the world with inherent value, I just want to remind you of these precious little ones. When they come into our lives, not only do they have value, but we would say they're invaluable. They're priceless and irreplaceable. So just having this notion that we are born worthy, and just seeing these little ones, I think, convinces us, oh yeah, of course we are. The problem is we lose sight of this. The problem is we just stop seeing that preciousness and value in each other, and as we mature. So our goal, I think, for all of us here, especially at the Humanistic Leadership Academy, is to get back to seeing each other as if we were valuable and indispensable, irreplaceable, and precious. To get us back to that beautiful place of seeing the value in each other. That's where we hope to go here. So, okay, now, because I'm an academic, I realized, all right, I saw all this dignity stuff everywhere I went, but what I decided that I needed was some kind of evidence. If I'm going into the corporate community and I want the leadership to buy into this leading with dignity message that I'm promoting, then I better have some pretty compelling evidence that this is real, these dignity violations and dignity assaults and dignity injuries, they're real. So someone told me about the field of social neuroscience, and I was amazed by it because what they ended up, these neuroscientists studying the brain and how people react under different circumstances, they did some studies where they put people in these brain scans, these fMRIs, and had them view on a screen above them, had them view different social situations, and just to see what happens in the brain. Where do we locate our reactions to different social circumstances? And what they found was that when somebody broke an arm or had a physical injury, what they demonstrated was that the brain area that was illuminated, that where all the blood flow went, was to this ancient part of our brain, the pain center, where we experience all kinds of deep emotions. And it's called the limbic area, and in particular the amygdala. So that was kind of like their control group, to show that this part of the brain gets activated when we're in pain and when we're suffering. But the most remarkable part about it was that they showed that when dignity is violated, they called this social pain. When people were hurting each other and violating each other and rejecting each other, that the same area of the brain was illuminated, lit up, when they felt they had this assault to their dignity. Yeah. So what this really means is that the brain doesn't know the difference between a wound to its dignity and a physical injury. That pain, that social pain that we can inflict on one another is as real in the brain anyway. But you think about what happens here. What happens here when we have a physical injury? Well, we go to the emergency room, we get the nice cast. Let's say it's a broken arm, we get a nice cast. But when we have injuries to our dignity, nothing happens. There's nowhere to go. There's no emergency room. There's nothing. And yet, we as humans, remember, we're trying to understand what it means to be human here. We humans react internally as if we were experiencing a physical injury. So when I show this to people who have doubts, because many people in the corporate world said to me in the beginning, "Oh, Donna, this is so touchy-feely, this stuff. This is so nice." I said, "You know what? It's more than nice, and let me show you why." And then I present this social neuroscience data, and people just like jaws drop, like, "Oh, really? You mean people feel dignity injuries when they're not treated well? They feel it inside as if something physical was wrong with them?" I said, "Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to say." So this is real. These dignity assaults are real. They trigger all kinds of horrible hormones that go through our bodies and make us feel terrible. And so our goal here in dignity leadership is to get people to recognize, especially people in leadership positions who are actually role modeling a lot of these behaviors, is to get them to see, wow, the effect that I have on other people is profound. I could either make somebody's day by treating them with dignity, or I can make them miserable by not treating them with dignity. So let's just get very specific here now. Back again to the research. What I realized was I had to make this real for people. What does it look like? How does it show up in my relationships? How does it show up inside me? And so I did some research with people all over the world and discovered that there were some major themes that ran through the stories that they told me about how they wanted to be treated. And these 10 elements, what I call the 10 elements of dignity, came through no matter where I was in the world. I was expecting cultural differences. The settings might have been different, but the emotional reaction to being violated, to having their dignity violated, was the same, which was more data for my exclamation that we have that highest common denominator of wanting to be treated as if we matter and wanting to be treated with dignity. So here are these 10 elements. People want their identity accepted, no matter their race, their religion, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, their physical capabilities, etc., all the isms. People want to be treated as if they were equal in dignity. And people often say to me, "Well, what about you've got all these leaders who are high status and they have power over us?" And what they basically wanted was that even though we may differ in status, we're equal in dignity. That's the main message about identity. We want to be treated as a human being, just like everybody else. Recognition. In the workplace, this was really quite profound because people want to be rewarded for or praised or have a little pat on the back when they do a good job. And acknowledgement. This is one of my, I think one of the most profound, because when people want acknowledgement when something happens to them, and that's painful or demeaning. And as David mentioned, I worked with Archbishop Tutu, and I said to him at one point, I said, you are the sort of the champion of reconciliation and helping people to put the past to rest. I said to him, what does it take for human beings to put the past to rest? And he said to me, look, Donna, it's pretty simple, that when people are he uses the expression, when people are roughed up, they want acknowledgement of the suffering that they've endured. So if somebody mistreats us, we want someone to come to us and say, hey, that was wrong. You should never have been treated that way. Anyway, acknowledgement's a big one. Inclusion, we all want to belong. We have that deep sense, deep yearning to belong and be connected in the community, in the workplace, wherever. Safety, this is both physical safety and psychological safety. I'm going to say more about that in just a minute. Well, all these things, fairness, we all know this. Independence, we don't like being micromanaged. Understanding, we all want to be understood. And one of the worst things that we feel is when we are judged unfairly. So understanding is critical for us. Benefit of the doubt, we want to be thought of as trustworthy. And accountability, finally. We want the person who harmed us to come and say, I'm sorry I violated your dignity. And part 2 of that apology is, and I'm going to work very hard to try to not do it again. That's what people want to hear. Because, you can get people who apologize, and then the next day they do the same thing. So they want that. Okay, so these are the 10 elements of dignity. I think of them as guidelines for good relationships and the rules of engagement in any work environment, any organization. And the thing is, when people feel that they're treated this way, the one immediate reaction is that they feel like they can trust their leaders. They feel that trust emerges when they're treated well. Now, the other thing is trust gets completely shattered when they're not treated well. In a nanosecond, you can break all of a good relationship. And I want to say one thing about safety before I move to the last slide, because safety, I said, it's not just physical safety, but psychological safety. When I first went into the corporate world and I asked people, the employees, which one of these 10 elements of dignity was violated the most in your workspace? And do you know that 80% of them said safety? And I said, safety, really? What? Tell me. And they said, we don't feel safe to speak up when something bad happens to us. And we're afraid to speak up to our leaders. Whoa, and 80%, and I saw this over and over and over again. So I think one of the main objectives for us, those of us interested in leadership, is to figure out how to solicit feedback from people and make it safe for them to be vulnerable. Because one of the things that happens is they're fearful that if they talk to their boss and speak up to their boss when the boss had violated their dignity, that they'd get some sort of retaliation. They might not get a good performance review. They might, all of this. So this is an imperative here. And we're working a lot on this, how to train people and how to give and receive and solicit feedback. Okay, the one last thing I want to point, wait a minute. Well, anyway, what I learned in all of this going in the corporate world, healthcare, education, everywhere, is that dignity consciousness, if you want to say that you've got dignity consciousness, combating all the ignorance that I described earlier, dignity consciousness requires 3 things. It requires connection, connection, and connection. So what are these 3 C's? I call them the 3 C's. The first connection, and probably the most important connection in many ways, to start with anyhow, is to be connected to your own dignity, to recognize that I have dignity no matter what. I might take a hit, somebody might mistreat me, but at the end of the day, I know my dignity is safe inside me. And, as Tutu said to me, this is the most important thing that prevented a bloodbath in South Africa during the apartheid regime, because he said everybody knew in the Black South African community that their dignity was in their hands and their hands only. And he said, that's how we survived. So that's the first. The second one is connection. The second connection is to the dignity of others. Because if we're all human beings sharing this planet, we are all equally as worthy and valuable. And we want to be connected to that sense of value and worth with other people. And the third connection is to be connected to something like the world around us, for example, something greater than ourselves. Understanding that, we share this planet. Nature is part of our all of our worlds, and we need that connection to something bigger than ourselves. And in the workplace, this also translates into, many people have told me they want a life of purpose in their job. They want to have meaning in what they do. They want to feel like they're contributing to something outside of just their own individual needs. They want to contribute to the greater good. So this connection, and I'm telling you where I am today, in trying to understand where I should take this work, and maybe we can talk about this in the Q&A. But how do we feel this connection, these three connections? What does it feel like to understand that we have inherent value and worth? What does it feel like to be connected with others and to be doing meaningful work or understanding the invaluable place that nature and the world, the environment plays in our own lives, and how we're connected to that? And I'll give you a little clue. I've been talking to some emotional neuroscientist, Richie Davidson. I don't know if some of you know his work, and because he's doing a lot of work on mindfulness meditation and how we can use mindfulness meditation to get connected at these three levels. So I'm just going to leave that little tantalizing thought and see what you think. But that's basically the direction that I'm going in now with this, is to figure out, how do we feel this? It's one thing to know it intellectually, and that's great. That's the first step. But how do we feel it? How do we know we have that inherent value and worth? And how can we see it in others? And how can we rejoice in having this beautiful world around us that we're all connected to? So that's where I'm going. But and one last thing I want to say here, just one last thing, is a quote by Victor Hugo that I love, which is that nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And I'm convinced that dignity's time is now. Thank you.
Donna, thank you so much. That's really wonderful. If we were in person, I would love to give you a round of applause for that. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that. Thank you so much for that introduction. One of the things that I heard that was very powerful was that you've taken this idea, which I think is present in philosophy and theology going back thousands of years, as you alluded to. That's been a part of your research in things like the golden rule, or in the categorical imperative. So treat people as ends in themselves and not just means to an end. And also the framework that you provided in providing evidence, a psychological basis for it, and saying, no, these things that people really feel in their human experience, that's inherent to who we are. Matching those two things together, I think, is really powerful. And also those 10 things that you shared, that constitute showing dignity, making this so practical and operational. Thank you for that. I'm sure that different people have different responses. I'm going to invite people to put questions in the chat. So in case you missed it at the beginning, the format of this is now, for the next few minutes until 20 minutes to the hour, I'm going to ask Donna a couple of questions. Then we'll have breakout groups where you'll be in groups of about 4 people. You'll be able to have your own discussions. And then the final 10 minutes will be an open Q&A and discussion session. Donna, the first question that I want to ask you is, what do you think prevents people from showing dignity? Leaders, people of influence in an organization, apart from just not knowing about this, we're bringing this idea to people, but other than just they don't know that it's important, what might prevent someone from giving someone else dignity?
Well, I usually say the ignorance. So you're right to say at the outset that apart from that, what is the problem? And I think the other thing is that there's just this fear. There's an inherent fear of looking bad in the eyes of others. Like, what if I try this and I'm not successful, and maybe I'm not even good at it? People have confessed to me that one of the reasons why they don't treat, people meaning in leadership positions, is because, they don't think psychologically, they tell me. I don't think this way. I'm a, get this job done kind of leader. I want to see outcomes. I want to see results. And I'm not going to baby them and make sure that they're, feeling. And I said, well, okay, I mean, there is this attitude, honestly, that I've come across, that it's just, I'm not psychologically gifted. This isn't one of my strengths. And I said, well, look, most people aren't. Most people are not. And that's why we have to learn this. And they would say to me, okay, but there's nowhere that I can learn this. And I said, well, this is why I'm here in your organization. Because if you buy into this, and if the evidence isn't clear enough that this really is something that you need to pay attention to, even though it feels difficult, you might not be psychologically, gifted, but I'll tell you, I said, these dignity violations unaddressed are what creates a toxic work organization. So if you want productivity, if you want employee engagement, if you want people giving discretionary energy, if you want loyalty, if you want trust, bingo, here's your solution.
Thank you. And just to say on that, there can be this perception that showing people dignity is somehow opposed to leading a successful organization. And I won't say too much about this, but I work for a company called Barry Waymiller, and our journey has been over the last 20 years that our CEO, Bob Chapman, has really focused on this dignity piece. And we're a very successful private company in the US. So if you're engaged with the Humanistic Leadership Academy, you'll have heard about that before, and I'm happy to give more resources. If anyone would like a case study to provide evidence of, no, this does work, you can build a successful organization and show people dignity as well. Another
David,
question. Oh, yeah,
can
go,
I
Donna.
say one thing, that Michael has written extensively about this. So, so his books and papers and everything that he and his colleagues have published show that this really is real in the work environment. So I don't know if, Michael, you want to say something about that, but
it's no coincidence that we see the excellence in organization and leadership is doing all of that, which you say intuitively, possibly, right? But it's not the mainstream, for sure.
Thank you very much. And then I have another question from Danae. Forgive me if I've mispronounced your name, but I suppose this might come from a personal place that many of us have experienced. It's a question about, well, what happens if you're in an organization that is a toxic organization, or that has systems or policies in place that don't respect people's dignity? You care about dignity, but you're constrained by the system. What do you do in that kind of situation?
I find that's really a difficult situation to be in, which is basically why I wrote that second book, Leading with Dignity: How to Create a Culture That Brings Out the Best in People, because I realized, having gone into many of those cultures that that the person just described, that is toxic and is hurtful, and the norm is it's okay to violate dignity. What I realized was that I had to get this message out about leadership and how important it was to integrate this into their leaders' repertoires, because this isn't just a nice little thing to do, that this has profound implications not only on the people, but equally as importantly on the mission of the organization. And this is where Michael's colleagues have really made a lot of headway in demonstrating that the organization suffers when people feel like they're not being treated with dignity. So it's something that, if you're a part of an organization like that and your leadership hasn't embodied or embraced this dignity stuff, it's hard. It's hard. That's why I made this claim. For people on leadership teams of big companies, you've got to do this. You've got to embrace this, because your people, the way it turns people around is just remarkable when you treat them well.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, now we come to the time in our session where it's an opportunity to connect with other people. It's a great joy being part of the Humanistic Leadership Academy to be able to connect with like-minded people, and for me to be able to connect people together. So I'm going to open some breakout rooms in a second. When you're in the rooms, if you're able to switch your camera on, please do that. Introduce yourselves, and then just chance for open discussion. So we're going to have a little bit of Q&A. Feel free, please, to use the chat function to communicate out. You can share, if you have resources, you putting it in the chat, whether it's research that you've done, research of other people that links with this, please do put it in the chat. If you would like to come off mute and say something, to ask a question or give a comment, I'll invite you please to keep them brief, just a couple of sentences, if you would, to give other people a chance to share. But do raise a hand digitally, use your digital hand raise thing, and then I'll invite you to speak. So whether in the chat or in person, please do go ahead. James, please.
I had a lovely discussion with Joan and Jean of Richmond, Virginia. And we really got to the point where we were talking about organizations and how dignity abuses perpetuate themselves. I was thinking in my own previous time in industry of how I would be dressed down, and then I as a leader would take that as a normal and continue and perpetuate that. And so how do you break that cycle? I guess it has to come from the top.
Well, that's what I argue, James, that, one of the most important reasons why leadership needs to embody this and to embrace this is because they need to set the tone. They need to demonstrate what this looks like and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And I think when people, employees see that the leadership is doing this, and especially doing it to them, it feels like, okay, well, this is acceptable. This is one of those implicit norms that get created, and the culture ends up suffering profoundly from it because everybody thinks it's okay. So I use examples like that all the time, James, when I talk to leadership teams. I say, people are watching you. Whatever you do, you've got to be careful because they're taking their cues from you. And they just had a hard time imagining that, James, to be true. And I said, oh, it is so true, because whatever you're doing, they feel like if you're doing it, then it's acceptable. But it's how these implicit norms of, like you said, dignity abuses. I love that. I don't usually use that word abuse, but I wrote it down because I think it's really summarizes, it is abuse, So thank you for that. But that's how I make the point with a leadership team, that they definitely have to set the tone, walk the talk, show people what it looks like, because at the end of the day, people are watching.
Thank you, Donna. And thank you, James, for that question. Gabriel.
Yes. Dr. Hicks, thank you so much for your time here and all of your time that you spent in your research. I'm curious to hear you speak about how you feel about having to make an appeal for dignity, given how a lot of companies and workspaces, at least I feel, view people as property as opposed to people. Yeah, how do you feel about even having to make this appeal? I think about my grandmothers who did not even have a middle school education. They had no issue with imparting dignity. And yet here we are in the academy having this conversation. And so I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, is it Gabriel? Gabriel? Yeah. I feel sad about that. I feel sad that it has to be so explicitly stated that human beings react badly to dignity abuses, to use James' words. I feel like our consciousness as human beings has not evolved very much when it comes to treating people with dignity. I mean, there's all kinds of issues everywhere in the world. There's structural dignity, indignities. There's interpersonal indignities. And, I on one hand, I feel sad that we have to even raise it to their awareness and their attention. And yet at the same time, I feel excited about that because I feel so strongly about how important this is, Gabriel, to treat each other this way. I feel like I can convince people that this is worth doing. And one of the things that I have to stay away from, because there's all kinds of research that shows, don't shame people into doing this. So what I try more than anything else is to take the shame out of raising the consciousness of people who are not dignity honorers, you know? And yes, it makes me sad that we have to do this, but at the same time, I know that this can make a difference with people if they don't feel shamed. You know, it's just like, you know, any of these other consciousness rate, like DEI work, for example. I have my colleagues who tell me we have to take the shame out of this because we're never going to get anywhere because people have such a strong reaction to being shamed. So what we found is that using the word dignity to try to get people to understand how to treat others is they get excited about it. Like, oh, because they can say to themselves, Gabriel, oh, I want to be treated that way. You know, of course, I want to be treated that way. So it's a mixed bag for me. On one hand, it feels some days I get depressed, honestly, when I see what's going on in the world. I get really depressed because I think, oh my gosh, this is just so big. This need for dignity consciousness is so universal. It's everywhere. But I think also that when we use that word dignity, that it takes us to a higher ground, Gabriel. It takes us to a higher ground. And this is what we all have to understand is that, yeah, we have to understand each other and not treat them badly. But at the end of the day, if we want to unify, whether it's in a country or in an organization, we all have to rally around this concept of dignity. And our leaders hopefully will take us there.
Donna, thank you so much. Gabriel, thank you for the question that inspired that. I would love to keep talking. Unfortunately, our time is gone, but this is not the end of the conversation. I'm just putting a link in our chat. We at the Humanistic Leadership Academy have many initiatives to help you to become a more humanistic leader and to inspire humanistic leadership in the world. The first step is to sign our manifesto if you've not signed that already, and doing that will put you on our communications list, so you will receive communication about the things coming up. Just to highlight a couple of things, we run cohorts every a couple of times a year, which are groups of professors like this, where we'll discuss ideas including dignity. This is one of them. We also have a summer conference coming up, and we'll put the link to that in this chat, which I think you'll still have access to afterwards. But you'll certainly, if you're on our communications list, then you'll receive that as well. I want to thank everyone for participating in this call today. It's been a great experience, great pleasure to be part of it. And Donna, I'll hand over to you just to close.
And just one closing comment, and I just want to thank everybody as well. I know everybody is so busy, and to take an hour out of your day, your busy time, and I'm so grateful that you decided to be here with us. But I wanted to say that next week, Matt, our dear friend Matt, oh God, I just blanked on his name.
Matthew Lee.
Yeah, our great friend. Yeah, no, Matt Lee is going to be talking about leading with love. And I have to say that one of the things that the way I answer my question, which was to you, what does dignity feel like? At the end of the day, I believe it feels like love. So we will usher Matt Lee in, and he will address what that looks like to lead with love.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So I hope you can make it next week, and thank you all for participating today. All the best. Take care.